Hi guys, Alex Phillips, former member of Nigel Farage's Brexit party, was making a fool of herself once again on Reform UK friendly Talk TV, where she discussed the lack of a returns agreement with the European Union. Now, during the post-Brexit negotiations, the UK government refused to discuss the issue of immigration, but now Rishi Suank is demanding a returns agreement with Europe. Therefore, Alex here claimed that the EU has essentially blood on its hands. Have a listen to this.
Speaking of incompetence, I mean, how much worse can this government get when it comes to trying to deal with the migrant crisis? I mean, it's literally gone from the really, really bad to the awful in about 7 days.
I mean, it's just going to get worse, isn't it? There is only one thing that could be done which would work, and they know it, and we know it, and everybody listening knows it, and that is to stop the boats coming over in the first place. If you had a situation where the boats got halfway across the channel and were sent back very quickly, it made headlines around the world. Yes, Rishi Suank would look a little bit unpopular at the next UN hobnobbing.
Let's assume for a moment that Border Force have enough vessels to turn back all of these boats. So they're waiting in the channel halfway between France and England, and they arrive these dinghies and they start trying to turn them back. Now, what happens if the people on the dinghies don't want to be turned back? What happens then? Do you think Border Force should just push them back? Well, there's a risk that the dinghies would submerge, would overturn, and people would die. There are some people who have life jackets, people who don't have life jackets, people who can swim, people who can't. Now, if people are in the water, what is the obligation of the Border Force then? Do you want them to abandon these people, or should they take them on board? So, do you understand the problem with this policy, this idea, let's turn back the boats? It doesn't work. Even if you had enough Border Force vessels, you wouldn't be able to do it. Because you're risking people's lives. Now, these people, of course, and this Alex Phillips will claim later in this interview that she cares about people who've lost their lives. Well, why are you suggesting a policy that risks their lives even greater, in a greater way, instead of suggesting a policy that would save lives, such as processing the claims in France or creating safe routes for people?
But do you know what? It would stop happening. All of a sudden, the French would get the message, we're not tolerating this. All of a sudden, the people traffickers would think, well, everyone's seen the headlines of the boats turning around. We're not going to get any customers anymore.
Is she really this stupid? She's talking to the concrete farmer here, who's, of course, not going to push back on any of this. But does she honestly believe that people smugglers in Turkey or in Afghanistan or in Libya are looking at this and going, oh my God, Alex Phillips is on to us. We're going to have to find an alternative. Does she honestly believe that? That this actually is making news in countries where people are leaving to seek asylum in Britain, for example? It's insane.
And that would actually work. It worked in Australia. It worked in New Zealand. Yet what we had the other day, when we had those the poor tragic souls who died in the Channel, drowned just off the coast of France, the French Navy escorted them to our side of the Channel and went, ta-ta, then have a nice time, bon voyage, and then they died. So
the French, if the people don't want to get on board the French vessel, what are the French supposed to do? And the French can't arrive at a British port because they wouldn't have permission. If they haven't permission, they can't arrive at the port. So I imagine they crossed into British waters and informed British authorities, we have these boats here, please come and pick them up. Like, well, what do you want them to do instead? To sink these vessels? To try and push them back and risk people's lives? What is going through these people's minds?
This is the game the French are playing, and now the EU is saying, oh, we're not going to have a returns agreement with you.
They didn't say that. Now, this is what the British media are reporting. Now, allegedly, Rishi Sunak, one of his officials, contacted the European Commission, I believe, and said, look, we want to have a new agreement when it comes to returning asylum seekers. The EU response was, well, we were trying to do that during the Brexit negotiations and you said no. Allegedly, according to UK reports, it was rejected. But it was later clarified by another EU official that it wasn't rejected. So it's probably still something, in the inbox, in the EU inbox. It's not going to be discussed at the moment. It hasn't been rejected. It's just not being discussed. Why? Because the EU has bigger issues. And when it comes to asylum seekers, there are far more, much bigger numbers arriving in Europe than are going to Britain. The EU has a very delicate issue in EU member states, Italy, Spain, Greece. This is a very sensitive issue, and they have to be able to resolve this. The last thing they need is a bunch of right-wingers in Britain putting pressure on the UK government to create trouble for the EU. It's like, no, we negotiated this back in 2020, 2019. This is your problem. It's not our problem. You're not a member of the European Union, so why should we be, dancing to your tune here? We have our own issue to deal with. We have concerns in our member states, and there's pressure from member states to do something at the EU level. The last thing we need is Rishi Suank arriving saying, hey, I'm losing support in the Conservative Party, in the Red Wall or whatever. There are people, in Dover complaining to me. Please help me out. It doesn't work like that.
They're politicising this and saying, well, because of Brexit, that means that if all these people are coming to you illegally because we have open borders.
This makes no sense. The EU doesn't have open borders, and they're not arriving illegal. So, but let's just think about that for a moment. If the EU has open borders, then how are the people illegal? She doesn't understand what open borders means, and she doesn't understand what asylum seekers are. But then she was a member of the Brexit Party, so that probably explains it.
And we didn't manage our frontiers. We're not going to take them back. And the EU essentially have blood on their hands, because if they said, OK, we're going to work with you to stop these people crossing the channel, people wouldn't cross the channel, people wouldn't die in the channel. And yet
they don't want to stay in Europe. They don't want to stay in France. What is wrong with you? These asylum seekers want to go to Britain. What do you want the French to do? To arrest them? Well, if they're being arrested, what crime have they committed? The crime of trying to claim asylum in Britain. It's not a crime. It's not a crime in France, and it's not a crime in Britain. So what do you want the French authorities to do? To push back boats, even though it risks the lives of the people both on the boat, on the dinghies, and the staff on the boats, the Coast Guard staff? What do you want the French authorities to do? They just keep saying, we need to send a message to the French. Okay, what is that message? Stop the boats leaving in the first place. Okay, but how do we do that? If somebody arrives in the middle of the night, we can't be monitoring the beach. The beach is quite long. The coast is quite long. But also, even if we do detain people, the next day or a few hours later, they're going to try again. What is the point of doing that? What is the point in keeping people in France who don't want to be in France? All just to keep a few headbangers in Britain happy. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.